The International Fellowship of Christians and Jews has been on the front lines fighting anti-Semitism and providing real help where it's needed most. They're giving food and shelter to Jewish families under threat, building bomb shelters for children, helping survivors of hate rebuild their lives. And they don't just respond to crises, they work daily to prevent them. To learn more about the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews and their life-saving work in Israel and around the world, go to levinforthefellowship.org. That's Levin for thefellowship.org.
Mark Levin and the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews bring you On the Front Lines.
Hello, America. It's Mark Levin. I'm here with our dear friend, Yael Eckstein. She's a wonderful lady. She does such great things. And this is On the Front Line, our joint podcast, West with One, and the wonderful IFCJ folks, International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. You know, Yael, let me just start out this way. If we didn't have your organization today, we would need somebody to create it, and that would be you. This is an incredibly important mission. I can't think of anything more important right now than this, and I want to thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Mark. I definitely feel we all have our calling, and I think the calling on my life, which is the same calling that was on my father, Rabbi Yael Eckstein of blessed memory, on his life, to build bridges between Christians and Jews, America and Israel, not based on politics per se, but on spiritual connections and things we have in common and values. I think it's more important and needed today more than ever before, because today we're fighting a common enemy as well.
You've got this massive anti-Semitism that's going on in the Western world. It's been funded a lot by terrorist-supporting entities throughout the world, but also leftist organizations, even Marxist organizations throughout the West, throughout the United States. You even see these groups active in the state of Israel. And so this isn't just anti-Semitism on the left. It's broader than that, isn't it?
Well, I think, Mark, throughout history, what we've seen is that every generation has another reason why they hate the Jewish people. Because what's the anti-Semitism? Anti-Semitism is saying that the Jewish people don't have a right to exist. It's baseless hatred. And when the Jewish people want is just family, belonging, being part of something, freedom. And instead, what anti-Semitism represents is exclusion, fear, and erasure. But it's not new. In every generation, there's a different excuse or reason why they hate the Jewish people. And they're able to fool so many. You could go as recently, of course, as communism and Nazism, but it goes way farther back than that. We see from the biblical times, we see wicked Haman, who convinced King Xerxes to destroy the Jewish people. You see Amalek, and you even see in Egypt enslaving the Jewish people, all of them as a nation. It's trying to break down the identity. And I believe, as a person of faith, I believe that it's really kind of fighting with God. And so what we're seeing today is definitely wearing new clothes. You see Hamas, you see Iran, you see the radical Islamists trying to erase all Jewish history, heritage, and religion. But you see it coming from both sides, because it's this spiritual warfare that is, for our generation, different than previous generations, yet really comes from the same source.
And you even see it now, despite the fact that this peace agreement has been signed. You don't see the people in the streets who were marching there before about protecting the Palestinians from Hamas. Hamas now slaughtering Palestinians. Hamas has killed 2 IDF soldiers and injured others and so forth. Doesn't that suggest that many of them were marching for different reasons? That is, just anti-Israel, anti-Jew, anti-American?
It's terrifying for me to see how silent those groups of people are who've been calling for a ceasefire for 2 years. And we finally have this historic ceasefire. We finally have this historic deal under the leadership of President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu that gets many of the moderate Islamic or Arab countries together, and they together are trying to wipe out Hamas and to free the Palestinian people from this reign of terror. And so I think it's unsettling that all those people who are calling for a ceasefire and cared so much about the Palestinian people, suddenly, now that there's real hope for a future for the Palestinian people, to be freed from this terror group Hamas, suddenly they're silent. But again, it goes back to something spiritual. You know, Mark, I was in the Knesset when President Trump went and gave his address to the Knesset and to the world. And it was incredible for so many reasons. Number one, from Prime Minister Netanyahu to opposition leader Yair Eckstein to President Trump, they were all just quoting the scriptures. They were all recognizing that when you talk about Israel, you're not just talking about geopolitics. There's something much deeper happening here. There's something that was promised and prophesied thousands of years ago, and it's coming to life before our eyes in our generation. And so what we're doing is trying to bring those prophecies of peace. We're trying to bring those prophecies of brotherhood, of nation will not rise up against nation, and we'll put we'll put the plows in the ground, and we won't know war anymore, and we'll be like the lion dwelling with the lamb, something that we thought was impossible come to fruition. And we're fighting these forces of evil that just want more war, just want more deaths. And what I saw in the Knesset was this is very clear, a war of people who sanctify life versus those who cherish death. And I saw that because it wasn't only what President Trump was speaking about in his speech, which was incredible, but we were actually waiting in the Knesset for around 2.5 hours because he arrives there late. And he was talking to families of the hostages, and he was so engaged in those conversations that his speech in the Knesset was very delayed. And what I saw was that in the very, very heated Knesset floor, where there are very different opinions, where there are very different philosophies, where there are very different people who focus and practice religion in different ways, what I saw in those 2.5 hours that we were waiting for President Trump was a celebration of unity. People from the left, people from the right, people who have been fighting for the past years how to end this war, simply hugging and kissing and giving high fives and giving genuine smiles and laughter because we got to our goal, which is freeing the hostages and bringing peace closer. To me, that says that's the side, whether on the right or the left, that you recognize that we need to sanctify life. And so it's not a war today of right versus left. It's a war today of darkness versus light. And unfortunately, we're seeing those forces of darkness on both the right and the left.
And they may come at it from different vantage points, as you point out, but they still seem to come to the same conclusion. And this is something that's still spreading. Why do you think that is? You've talked about the historical perspective, but I think there's also this issue of immigration in many respects that some of the Islamist so-called scholars have talked about since the 1960s. That is, for people, Islamists, jihadists, to move into the West, to have a role in the West, to secrete themselves in the media, in the communities in the West. I see this taking place. Do you see this too?
Well, just like we just established that there are bad people, these forces of darkness on the right and the left on both sides, and there's also these forces of light and hope and sanctity of life on both sides, we can say the same for the Islamic or Muslim world. There are many Islamic countries, Muslim countries, today who have outlawed Hamas, who have outlawed the Muslim Brotherhood. You see Jordan and Egypt and Saudi Arabia that have outlawed mosques that are preaching hatred and death. And what we've seen is that where have they gone when they've left those countries in the Middle East that have outlawed speaking terror in the name of Islam? They've gone to America and Europe in order to preach this philosophy of hatred and death and darkness, and under the laws of free speech, somehow they are protected. And so we're seeing that spread from mosques to the street and different protests, to the media, to political leaders. And just like communism and Nazism, that nobody thought would be able to spread so quickly, nobody thought would be the majority, because maybe even the majority didn't support them. But it's those people that were silent that enabled it to spread so quickly and for ultimately the whole world to fall into chaos. And that's what I think all of us with our eyes open are starting to see today in the West. We're starting to see that if we don't recognize at least the threat to America, just like it is to Israel, to Christians, just like it is to Jews, if we don't at least start off by recognizing it and calling it a threat, there's no way that we are going to be able to survive this onslaught of darkness.
Yeah, brilliantly put. We're going to take a short break now, America, and the whole world, actually. Our wonderful guest here with Yael Eckstein, International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. Very, very important. We have this wonderful podcast partnership, Westwood One and IFCJ. This is On the Front Line, and she's on the front line. She's living right there in the Holy Land, and she sees this, and she's working the communities, and they're doing everything they can in Israel to help the Jewish people, Christian people too, coming together, volunteering. It's absolutely fantastic. We'll be right back. Folks, we're seeing something truly disturbing. Anti-Semitism is on the rise around the world and sadly right here in America. Jewish schools being targeted, synagogues threatened, families living in fear. It's something we hope we never see again in our lifetime. And let me say this, silence is not an option. This is the moment for all of us to stand together. That's why I want to tell you about the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, or IFCJ. They're on the front lines providing real help where it's needed most. They're giving food and shelter to Jewish families under threat, building bomb shelters for children, helping survivors of hate rebuild their lives. And they don't just respond to crises, they work every day to prevent it. To learn more about the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews and their life-saving work in Israel and around the world, please go to levinforthefellowship.org. That's Levin for thefellowship.org. Welcome back, folks. This is On the Front Line with our friend Yael Eckstein, International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. I love doing this podcast with her. She's very informed. She's a great patriot. She's right there on the front lines in the Holy Land, International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. I'd really love you to check them out, ifcj.org, ifcj.org, because those of you who are listening, you believe in this mission, what this fellowship is doing, as do I so strongly. Yael Eckstein, there's this big push now by people who are very sinister, pushing this notion of replacement theory, sort of the perversion of Christianity. And I've got many pastors who are friends of mine, some of the biggest in the United States. One of them is one of my best friends, John Hagee, Cornerstone Church in San Antonio, Texas, with his massive congregation. And there's a reason for it, because he's a great man. What do you make of this?
Well, I think it's the same historic success story of the church getting their people to turn against the Jewish people, that they did so well that it led to World War II. They did so well that it led to the Holocaust. Replacement theology saying God changed his mind and the church has replaced Israel in God's covenant. And it's led to so many blood libels and mass killings. And they saw that it worked. And for so many years, as Barry Weiss said, the Jewish people have had a vacation from history. But we never thought that history would return like this. And so most of what we're seeing today in the baseless hatred of the Jewish people, of anti-Semitism, that's all about exclusion and fear and erasure of the Jewish people, most of that is not coming from the Christian church. But we do see it, unfortunately, starting again. These Jezebel figures, these forces of darkness, of spiritual warfare, are looking at what worked in the past to turn the Christians against the Jews, and they're pulling out those same weapons, and that is replacement theology. So on one hand, we're seeing replacement theology grow, but on the other hand, people like John Hagee, what people that I call the modern Corrie ten Booms and Oscar Schindlers, and there are hundreds of millions of them. Their voices are getting stronger than ever before. So I think it's based on so many people who are biblically illiterate. If you don't know what the scriptures say, then you can be fooled by any podcaster or any person who wants to misconstrue the words of the scriptures. And so I think the answer to it, Mark, in its most simple form, is to study the scriptures and know what the scriptures say, not what these people who are trying to change the scriptures are trying to make you believe.
And the scriptures say, as these pastors point out, who are many of them evangelical Christians and so forth, the scriptures talk about the chosen people. The scriptures talk about Jesus being a rabbi and Jewish, the apostles and so forth and so on. This deep attachment to the Jewish faith. And when you go to Israel, you see these locations, these ancient locations, Jews and Christians alike, right?
Wow, it's incredible, Mark. And you've been to Israel. So you've been to places like Nazareth, where there are still ancient Christian communities that are living and worshiping and in freedom and respect. It's a fast-growing population in Israel. It's the only place in the Middle East that there's a growing Christian population. And actually, the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, we give them food boxes for Christmas, and we help build a hospital for the Christian community in Nazareth. But then you go to places like Bethlehem, as we call it in Hebrew. And if Jesus was alive today, he wouldn't be allowed in there because there's no Jews allowed in Bethlehem. And forget about Jews, it used to be 80% Christian when Israel had authority over Bethlehem. And after they give it to the Palestinian Authority, since then it's gone down to under 10% Christians in Bethlehem. And so we see the numbers dwindling, this persecution. And so, like you pointed out, our enemies recognize that we're connected, these Judeo-Christian values, Jews and Christians that are worshiping one God, that are standing in these values of sanctity of life and truth, what America was founded on, what America continues to prosper on. Our enemies recognize that. And thank God there are so many Christians who recognize it as well, that we have to stand together. But unfortunately, like you pointed out, there are Christians who, in the name of Christianity, are actually spreading replacement theology and things that are actually the antithesis of what God said and what the scripture said. And what we know, Jews and Christians who read the scriptures, is that when God says something's forever, he doesn't change his mind. And we're living in a time today where you don't have to look far. You see the words of Ezekiel from over 2,000 years ago, of Jeremiah, the ingathering of the Jewish people to Israel, that Jerusalem will be restored, that once again there'll be bridegrooms and the sound of laughter in the walls of Judah and in the walls of Jerusalem. I was at a wedding, literally, in the walls of Jerusalem, the words of Ezekiel coming to life. So I think we have to focus on studying the scriptures, opening up our eyes to what God is saying. And it's very clear. He's calling in every way for Jews and Christians to have spiritual clarity and to stand together.
Do you feel this is happening for the most part? I sense it is. Do you feel that it's happening for the most part, that believers, faithful Christians are standing with the Jewish state in Israel? I mean, I think there's a cabal out there who are trying to influence the vast majority, but my sense is that most Christians understand this. What is your sense?
Wow, I think you are so spot on, Mark. And that's what's incredible. There's what I call silenced majority. It's not a silent majority because they're actually speaking very loud. It's silenced majority because they're not being given the time or the platform on mainstream media. And so you don't hear them as much. But there are so many Christians who are yelling out and calling out in every way. We stand as Christians with our Jewish brothers and sisters. We recognize that we are grafted onto the rich olive tree of Israel. And as Christians, we have to stand in this olive tree together, the branches and the roots. And so that's why the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews ministry that I lead, that's why it's so important, because those silenced majorities have a voice through the fellowship. So what I see is we have over 700,000 donors, Mark. People who have given even a gift of $5 or $10 or $100 that goes to feeding the hungry and clothing the naked and sheltering the poor. But even more than that, it goes to getting this voice out. We won't be silenced. All the Christians do not stand against Israel. And as Christians, there are so many righteous people who are doing everything to declare boldly, unapologetically, we stand together, Jews and Christians, especially now to counter this darkness.
And isn't it especially true that with this president fighting so hard to get the hostages out, fighting so hard during the course of this war to provide the weapons that Israel had purchased and also those nuclear sites and so forth. I mean, this is a truly special alliance and friendship between the American people and the Israeli people. Don't you think so?
This is the most sacred alliance. I can't even begin to tell you what Israel was like when President Trump arrived. People woke up at 4 a.m. to write on the beaches of Tel Aviv, "Thank you, President Trump," and put a huge American flag so that when he was flying over the beach for 1 second, he would be able to see that. That wasn't the government, that was the people. People were writing signs with their kids and putting it in their windows. Every billboard was sponsored saying, "Welcome and thank you, President Trump." God is working miracles through this administration. We never thought that we would have all of our hostages home, all of the living hostages home. We never thought we would have the Abraham Accords of these Arab countries that are standing in unity with America and with Israel for a better world and peace. And we never thought that we would see the day where America is unapologetically strong. We thought those days were over. And what we see is that when America is strong, the world is stable. When America is strong, there's no void for the radicals to move into. When America is strong, miracles happen. And that is the miracle of peace. And so I think we have to both recognize what happens when there's a strong America, when there's a faithful America, when Jews and Christians stand together, when Israel and America stands together, and also be prepared that we can't always rely on our governments, Mark. We have to, as people, make our voices heard. And that's why the fellowship has been so consistent, no matter what administration it is, no matter what the administration's doing. We're on the ground telling the people of Israel, this isn't based on politics. We're going to be here to bring the Jewish people home from Ukraine and Russia and South America and all the places that they're in need, from the Arab world that I can't even say where. It doesn't matter what government in America or Europe around the world is in place. The fellowship is saving lives, bringing biblical prophecy to fruition, and uniting Christians and Jews in the sacred mission.
Beautifully put. We're going to take a short break. We're here with Yael Eckstein. She's just fabulous. International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, an essential organization for those of us who are Jewish or Christian, and the import of this organization in the Holy Land of Israel and actually throughout Europe and the rest of the world. Very important. This is On the Front Line, our joint partnership, our podcast with Westwood One and the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. I would encourage you to check out their website, ifcj.org. You're going to love it. And you know, if you support this organization, it truly is a blessing. You feel really great about it. You know that what you're doing is going to have a direct impact right on the ground. ifcj.org. Please check them out. We'll be right back. Folks, we're seeing something truly disturbing. Anti-Semitism is on the rise around the world and sadly right here in America. Jewish schools being targeted, synagogues threatened, families living in fear. It's something we hope we'd never see again in our lifetime. And let me say this, silence is not an option. This is the moment for all of us to stand together. That's why I want to tell you about the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, or IFCJ. They're on the front lines providing real help where it's needed most. They're giving food and shelter to Jewish families under threat, building bomb shelters for children, helping survivors of hate rebuild their lives. And they don't just respond to crises, they work every day to prevent it. To learn more about the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews and their life-saving work in Israel and around the world, please go to levinforthefellowship.org. That's Levin for thefellowship.org. Welcome back, folks. This is On the Front Line with Yael Eckstein, who's the head muckety-muck over there at the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, and I'm just little old Mark Levin here on Westwood One. This is our podcast joint network. Thanks so much for listening. You know, Yael, I think one of the important things here is to have the courage to speak out. It's to have the courage to use whatever role we have in life to speak out for Judaism and Christianity in our relationship, the state of Israel and the state of the United States in our relationship, for and against those who are filled with hate and venom, who are trying to destroy all of it. Isn't that true?
I don't think anyone could have said that better, Mark. There was a time where I felt like faith was being silenced. And what I've seen is after the assassination of my dear friend, of course, what we saw was that the people of faith are speaking out, not only in memory of Charlie Kirk, but all the people who are inspired by him and are taking a little piece of what he was doing, which was saying, faith is nothing to be embarrassed about. It makes the world better. As people of faith, what are we called to do? To get married, to have children, to stand with truth, to not lie, to sanctify life. All of these sacred values that we stand together in that for so long was silenced. And I see people now standing up and speaking out more than ever before. And so my prayer is that we'll be able to continue to speak this together, Christians and Jews, Israel and America, and that we'll recognize that it's through faith that we're going to heal the world. There's a snowball effect, both of good and of bad. And so you see faith being used to send suicide bombers and to use human shields, and faith being used to start wars and bomb coffee shops. But the answer to that is our real faith, our pure faith, our Judeo-Christian values that represent a faith of a holy God of love and not a God of hatred that our enemies are trying to make the world transform into.
Yeah, that's so true. And every voice does matter at the dinner table, in the workplace, in the place of worship. If you're just out and about and you hear things or you want to say things, I mean, you're not to be rude and get in people's faces. We don't believe in that. But conversation is conversation. And I think it's very important that people inform themselves. And one of the things you believe in, and I believe in too, is the spiritual power, the power of prayer, correct?
Wow. I believe that power is something that is the most powerful thing in the world. This is all I can say. Our weapon of change is prayer. I believe everyone has the ability to make a change because everyone has the ability to pray. And when you talk about everyone being needed and every voice being valuable, I want to tell you this inspiring story that happened with our Flags of Fellowship. It was a year ago that it was approaching the first anniversary of October 7th. And we had a lot of churches coming to us and saying, how can we honor the 1-year anniversary of October 7th, the worst attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust, when 1,200 people were murdered and there were over 200 people kidnapped, children, elderly. And so we started this Flags of Fellowship project. We said, you know what? The enemies of Israel are burning Israel's flags, just like they're burning American flags. You could plant Israel's flags and plant an American flag. The Jewish people are scared to plant an Israeli flag or wear their Star of David. As Christians, you can do that. And so our goal is to have 25 churches signed up for this, Mark. The first year, we had over 500 churches, at least one church in every state across America that was waving 1,200 Israeli flags and American flags around October 7th. And this year, our goal was to get 750 churches to do that. And we blew that goal out of the water. There were over 1,300 churches in America, along with synagogues and college campuses and seminaries, that around October 7th in our Flags of Fellowship project, they planted 1,200 Israeli flags. They preached on Israel. They taught the biblical roots of Israel. And that means over 1.5 million Israeli flags were waving across America. And so if we think one person doesn't make a difference, one church doesn't make a difference, one donation doesn't make a difference, I've seen how one food box will save the life of an elderly Holocaust survivor. The message here is when we stand together and we all act in prayer and whatever action we can that we're called to take by God, that we're able to take, it changes the world because together we are strong.
And you make a great case, a great statement that anti-Semitism doesn't end with Jews. It starts with Jews, but it is an evil that spreads. In other words, it's anti-humanity. And when you look at anti-Semitism through the ages, I don't care if it's Spain or Germany or whatever it is, the millions of people who suffer the inhumanity of it, Jews, Christians, everybody, is enormous, right? Isn't that one of your big arguments?
Wow. It starts with the Jews, and it never in history has ended with the Jews. And we just have to look at our enemies to see that. They say themselves, first we're going for the Saturday people, which are the Jews, and then we're going for the Sunday people, which are the Christians. They say first we're going for the little Satan, which is Israel, and then we're going for the big Satan, which is America. In fact, the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews is operating in Syria, protecting and providing for the persecuted Christians that are being targeted in Syria. We've set up health clinics. We've distributed thousands of food boxes because they're facing the same persecution as we are. You look in Nigeria, what's happening. And let me tell you, it's not just the Jews and the Christians. If you think as an atheist or a liberal, you're protected, look at what they do to people who are accused of being gay in Gaza. They either tie them by their ankles and drive them through the streets, or they put them on top of buildings and have everybody watch as they push them off. That's not after even a trial. That's not even after it's if they accuse someone of being a homosexual, they are murdered. And so no one's safe. Humanity's not safe when we let evil take over. And we saw that with the communists, and we saw that with the Nazis. And somehow so many people have forgotten. But Mark, you and I haven't forgotten. Your listeners haven't forgotten. And I know we will have a majority that will stand up for this light and this hope. And that's what will overtake the darkness. I believe it.
I believe it too. And I believe this audience is the perfect audience to coalesce around this, to push this very, very hard. And I think we will. And your leadership, the leadership of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, is so essential and so important. I must tell you, it's very invigorating when I read about what you folks are doing on the ground in war-torn areas, before wars, during wars, after wars. It's really quite amazing. And it is a fantastic fellowship, folks. You're listening to On the Front Line. I really want to encourage you to check out their website, ifcj.org, ifcj.org, the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. As a matter of fact, look at their history. Yael's father was a remarkable man. He founded this organization. He saw a need for it. And we have people now who are trying not just to destroy Israel, that would be bad enough, but they're trying to destroy the United States. They're trying to destroy Judaism, and they're trying to destroy Christianity. And I call it this fusion of Marxism and Islamism, radical Islamism. And I just wanted to ask you, Yael, any final words on this tonight's program?
Wow. Well, I just wanted to say thank you, Mark. I believe that we're in a time where the hunger will not be for bread and the thirst will not be for water, but to hear the word of the Lord. And I believe the word of the Lord is one of justice and caring for one another and spreading truth and standing in brotherhood. And that's exactly what you do every single day. So thank you. Thank you to all of your listeners, and may God bless you.
And same to you. God bless you too. And you've been listening to On the Front Line with Yael Eckstein of IFCJ, International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, ifcj.org. Please check them out. And I'm Mark Levin with Westwood One. God bless you all, and God bless you, my friend.
To learn more about the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, visit ifcj.org.
Folks, we're seeing something truly disturbing. Anti-Semitism is on the rise around the world, and sadly right here in America. Jewish schools being targeted, synagogues threatened, families living in fear. It's something we hope we'd never see again in our lifetime. And let me say this, silence is not an option. This is the moment for all of us to stand together. That's why I want to tell you about the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, or IFCJ. They're on the front lines providing real help where it's needed most. They're giving food and shelter to Jewish families under threat, building bomb shelters for children, helping survivors of hate rebuild their lives. And they don't just respond to crises, they work every day to prevent it. To learn more about the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews and their life-saving work in Israel and around the world, please go to levinforthefellowship.org. That's Levin for thefellowship.org.